All right, guys, let's do a Bible study, and I think you're going to find this fascinating. I know I did when I discovered it. We're going to read from Romans 15, and I'm going to talk to you about a female disciple, apostle, and there were many of them, but one of the most liberating powers is Christianity. When you think of freedom, the very first thing I think of is Christianity. Jesus Christ said, "Whom the Son of Man sets free is free indeed." Sometimes I'll talk to people and they'll talk about slavery in the Bible, which was created by man. And because man has free will, God allows a lot of things like slavery, divorce. They asked Jesus about divorce. Jesus said, God allowed it because of the hardness of your hearts. Well, one of the things also that God allowed are women apostles, disciples. And I want to talk to you. There were no women disciples that walked with Jesus. They were all men. But there's some little secret messages within the Bible I want to go through with you where you can see that the women were very instrumental, and even they were disciples of Jesus Christ. So notice what it says here in Romans 15. It says, "We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves." Now, I used to be an atheist, as you guys know, and I always tell people I got two things and I became a Christian. Number one, I got a brain and I used it and I read the Bible and I researched the historic person of Jesus Christ. Number two, I got a heart and I opened my heart to God and His Word, and I humbled myself and I confessed I'm a sinner. And before, when I was an atheist and I would read this, my heart wasn't right. I wouldn't understand. What does that mean? We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. I didn't get that. Okay. When you become a Christian and you start reading about God's nature, you start to understand it. What this means, where it says in Romans 15, "We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves." What that's talking about is spiritual strength. Now, it is interesting that the humanist, they will focus a lot on the fleshly things. They'll talk a lot about, sex, material things, different recipes that are great, and different alcoholic beverages that are great. And then, of course, when they look at the ape or the monkey in the wildlife, they'll say, "Well, you see that he looks kind of like me, and he acts like me. He's only the monkey, the ape, does not have a spiritual discernment. It's everything's about the flesh, feeding its flesh, where it's going to eat, procreation." And so when humanists look at the animals and they, "Well, he kind of looks like me, and he acts like me, like an animal," and this is why humanism likes to promote evolution, because to them they can relate to the animals. But when you're a Christian, when it says here, "We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmity of the weak," it's talking about Christian, a spiritual strength. What that means is, I'll give you an example. I'll confess something to you guys. I don't really like drinking alcohol. I don't judge people that drink it, but I can have a beer or a glass of champagne, and I'm okay with that. I have that freedom in Jesus Christ. Of course, my weakness is pizza. But if there's a new Christian, a weaker Christian that doesn't have the spiritual strength that I have, what this is saying is I'm not supposed to just pop open a Corona or Michelob, whatever, Lowenbrau, whatever you guys drink, and just drink it in front of this weak Christian, because he does not have the spiritual strength yet to go ahead and drink that beer, and nor should I go ahead and drink in front of him. Oh, come on, that's ridiculous. You have the freedom to drink a beer here. And I pop one open for him, and he starts drinking it, and then he feels guilty, because he feels like he's sinning. So that's what that means. We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak. If I'm driving in my car and a AC/DC song "Highway to Hell" comes on, I'm strong in the faith, so it doesn't offend me. But if I have a Christian brother or sister there with me, and they have a different opinion of that, or they're weaker in the faith, I'm not going to go ahead and listen to that. I don't want to offend them, you see. So that's what that means. Also, gaming. Gaming. I do a lot of multiplayer games. You meet a lot of people there. It's great to bring people to your channel. If someone comes over to my house, and they're offended by gamings where you shoot the evil zombies or whatever, I won't do that. So that's what that's talking about. We then that are strong, that would be me, that would be you, hopefully, ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. Okay, now, this is awesome. Check this out, you guys. I'm reading this. This is a letter from Paul, and he says, he writes the letter, and he says, "Greet Mary, who bestowed much labor on us." Okay. "Salute Andronicus and Junia." And then, I don't know if you can see this, right here, there's a comma. And then Paul says, "My kinsmen," and then there's a comma, "and my fellow prisoners, comma, who are of note among the apostles." Now, look at that. This is shocking. He even says they're among the apostles, and he says, "who also were in Christ before me." In other words, they were a believer in Christ before Paul was. But if you study the Greek language, this name Junia is a female name. Is that awesome or what? "Salute Andronicus and Junia," and then it says comma, and then he says, "my kinsmen," like also my kinsmen, and then comma, "and my fellow prisoners," comma. So Junia, and this is my belief. If you guys have a different opinion on it, hey, I'm all ears. I'll listen to you and stuff. But I believe, after much study, that Junia was a female apostle. That is awesome. Because Paul says, "who are of note among the apostles, who also were in Christ before me." So they were believers before Paul, and they're among the apostles. Now, what some people will do, I guess there's some chauvinist or whatever out there, they'll try to say, no, they're just noteworthy among the apostles. But if you look at the original Greek, you really have to stretch it to make it say that. I'm willing to bet my life that when it says, "Greet Mary, who bestowed much labor on us, salute Andronicus and Junia, comma, my kinsmen, comma, and my fellow prisoners, comma, who are of note among the apostles," I believe Junia is a female apostle. I believe that. And so it is interesting. And there are a lot of women, when you read the Bible, some of the first people that greeted Jesus were women. The Bible is pro-woman. It is very liberating for women. When the men and the women wanted to stone the woman caught in adultery, which was the law, she did deserve stoning, Jesus actually saved her life. And what should have been done in that day was she was caught in adultery, the law said to stone her. Jesus actually expounded on the grace of God. So it is interesting. Check it out. Romans 16. Go to Romans 16:7 and check that out. I believe that is a female apostle. Very interesting, because this Junia is a feminine name. It's a female's name. God bless you guys. You're going to see my radio show pop up here, shotgunnow.net. Go there, and I do some Bible studies, and I take live calls from atheists, Wiccans, pagans. Very interesting on the radio, shotgunnow.net, right there.